Hey everyone, tonight we are traveling to the middle of nowhere. No, really. We're heading to a place so remote, so utterly disconnected from the continents, that its very existence feels like an impossibility. You are standing on a speck of volcanic rock in the vast, crushing emptiness of the Pacific Ocean. The wind doesn't just whistle here, it screams, carrying the salt of thousands of miles of empty water. And as your eyes adjust to the stark, grassy landscape, you see them, the giants. Silent, brooding, and impossibly large, they stand with their backs to the sea watching you. This is Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, and the stone figures, the Moai, have kept their secrets for a millennium. You probably wouldn't survive this isolation. The psychological pressure of being 2,300 miles from Chile, the nearest continental landmass, is a heavy blanket. It's the kind of quiet that makes your own thoughts loud. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and post your location and what time it is for you in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from, especially when we're talking about a place this far-flung. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The plane ride to get here was a statistical anomaly. You spent 6 hours over uninterrupted blue, a tiny metal tube aiming for a target only 13 miles wide. Now that you're here, the silence is the first thing you notice. It's not just quiet, it's an ancient, profound absence of noise. You stand on the coast, the volcanic rock sharp and black under your feet. The air is humid, thick with salt, and the wind is relentless. It's the only voice here, and it has been howling over this landscape since it first breached the surface of the ocean 3 million years ago. You're standing on the most isolated piece of inhabited land on Earth. Let that sink in. Not one of the most, the most. The nearest neighbors, the Pitcairn Islands, are over 1,200 miles away, and they're barely inhabited themselves. This isolation is the key to everything. It's the variable that makes Rapa Nui a perfect and terrifying human experiment. You can't just pop over to the next island for supplies. There is no next island. Everything the Rapa Nui people had, they either brought with them in their original canoes or they made from the island itself. There was no iron, no copper, no bronze. There was just this volcanic rock, some trees, and an ocean that tried its best to swallow you whole. You walk inland, away from the crash of the surf, and the grass is high, buffeted by the wind. Then you see it. Your first ahu, a ceremonial platform. It's a wall of meticulously fitted, unmortared stones facing the sea, and on top of it, outlined against the gray sky, are the Moai. They are massive. The pictures, the videos, the plastic replicas you've seen in souvenir shops, they are all pathetic jokes. They do not prepare you for the scale. They are giants, 15, 20, 30 feet tall. Their faces are long, stylized, with pronounced chins and heavy brows. They don't look at you. They look through you. Their backs are to the ocean. And this is a crucial detail. They were not built to scan the horizon for approaching ships or, as some fringe theories suggest, to welcome ancient astronauts. They were built to watch over the villages that once stood here. They are stylized ancestors, protectors, gazing inward at their descendants. You approach the ahu, carefully as it's a protected site, and the engineering is the first puzzle. The platform itself is a marvel. Some of these stones, separate from the statues, weigh several tons. They are fitted together with a precision that rivals the stonework of the Inca in Peru, a fact that has led to all sorts of wild trans-Pacific contact theories. Historians still argue whether any such contact was feasible, or if it was simply a case of convergent evolution, two separate cultures solving the same engineering problem, how to build a really sturdy wall, with the same solution. But the Moai on top, that's another level. You crane your neck staring up. How did they get this 40-ton block of stone up here? And more importantly, how did they get it here, to this spot on the coast from the quarry? You suddenly realize the quarry isn't nearby. The quarry, you've been told, is on the other side of the island. You look around at the landscape. It's not flat. It's rolling, grassy, and treacherous. There are no large animals to pull a sled. There are no rivers to float a barge. And most conspicuously, there are no trees. Not a single large tree. The island is almost completely barren of timber. This is the central mystery. The Rapa Nui quarried, carved, and transported hundreds of multi-ton stone gods across miles of difficult terrain, raised them onto platforms, and then they vanished, leaving an island stripped bare. You feel a weird, creeping sense of vulnerability. It's the nowhereness. If your car breaks down, you can't just call for a tow. If the island's single generator fails, the darkness is absolute. It's the same feeling the original settlers must have had, but magnified. When they landed here, sometime around 800 to 1200 AD, they were hitting the jackpot. An island covered in lush subtropical forest, home to the largest palm trees in the world teeming with seabirds. It was paradise. And now you're standing in a grassland that looks more like the Scottish Highlands than a tropical island. It's a sobering thought. They built these impossible statues, these monuments to their mana or spiritual power, using resources that were finite. And they didn't stop. They kept building, kept competing until the last tree was cut down. At least that's the most popular story. And it's a terrifyingly human one. That sobering thought hangs in the air, as heavy and persistent as the wind. You're standing on an ecological crime scene, and the victims, the suspects, and the detectives are all the same people. But to understand why they did it, why they carved and moved these giants even as the world that supported them was vanishing, you have to understand the place itself. You pull out a map, though it's almost comically simple. Rapa Nui is a triangle. It's not a rough approximation, it's a near-perfect triangle defined by 3 major volcanoes at its corners. At the southwestern tip, there's Rano Kau, a massive crater with a freshwater lake inside, looking like a bite taken out of the island. In the east, you have Poik, an older, more eroded volcano. And to the north, there's Teravaka, the highest point on the island. Though high is relative, it's barely 1,600 feet. The entire landmass is forged from the lava of these 3. You decide to walk up Teravaka. It's not a difficult climb, more of a long, grassy slog. As you ascend, the wind gets meaner, trying to push you back down. But the view is what hammers the point home. You reach the summit and turn in a slow circle. From here, you can see the entire island. Both ends of the single airport runway, the tiny capital village of Hangaroa, the white foam of the waves crashing on all 3 sides. And beyond that, nothing. Just an endless 360-degree panorama of dark blue curved at the edges. It's the loneliest view in the world. You're on a 63-square-mile life raft. The Rapa Nui themselves called it Te Pito Te Henua, which is often translated as the navel of the world. It's a beautifully poetic name, suggesting a center, a point of creation. But some linguists also suggest it could mean the end of the land, a much bleaker and perhaps more literal interpretation. This geography is not just a backdrop, it's the entire script. The Rapa Nui were master Stone Age navigators, Polynesians who had crossed thousands of miles of open ocean in double-hulled canoes, reading the stars, the swells, the flight of birds. Historians still argue whether the island was settled by a single, desperate lost canoe or if it was a deliberate colonization, perhaps followed by a second or third wave. But once they arrived, that was it. The return journey was nearly impossible. The isolation was absolute. They were trapped in paradise. And the island's resources were as finite as its coastline. The soil is volcanic, rich but porous. Fresh water is scarce, mostly collecting in the crater lakes like the one at Rano Kau. There were no native land mammals other than perhaps some bats and insects. The settlers brought chickens, and as a common story goes, stowaway rats. For protein, it was chickens, some farming, and the sea. But the sea here isn't the gentle turquoise lagoon of a place like Tahiti. The volcanic shelf drop-off is severe, making deep-sea fishing a dangerous, high-stakes gamble. So they hunted the local seabirds, which roosted on the island in the millions. You can see the problem, can't you? It's a closed system, a terrarium. Every tree cut, every bird eaten, every sweet potato harvested was a debit from an account that had no external deposits. This is the pressure cooker that forged the Rapa Nui culture. And in that pressure cooker, they did something baffling. They didn't just focus on survival. They didn't hunker down and create a minimalist, sustainable society. They did the opposite. They got grandiose. They looked at the soft volcanic tuff of the Rano Raraku volcano and saw gods in waiting. They started to carve. You hike back down, the vastness of the ocean making you feel small, the wind chilling your skin. You think about that. We, as a species, tend to do this. Species, when faced with the terrifying existential dread of our own insignificance, like, say, being stuck on a rock in the middle of a frighteningly large ocean, we build things. We build cathedrals. We build pyramids. We build rockets. We build things to prove we were here, to shout into the void. The Rapa Nui, lacking metal, lacking wheels, lacking any advanced technology, took that human impulse and dialed it to 11. They had stone. They had manpower. And they had a deep, abiding belief in their ancestors. The isolation didn't just limit their resources, it focused their minds. There were no outside influences, no neighboring countries to trade with, war against, or borrow ideas from. Every idea, every innovation, every obsession was homegrown. This makes the Moai phenomenon even more incredible. It's not a borrowed concept. It's a pure distilled expression of Rapa Nui spirituality. They weren't just carving statues. They were carving mana, the spiritual power of their lineage, into the very bones of the island. And in this tiny triangular arena, that mana became a currency. The island was divided into different clans, or mata, and it seems they all got locked into an arms race. But instead of nuclear warheads, they were building bigger and bigger ancestors. It's the most human thing in the world. My God is bigger than your God. Or in this case, my great-great-grandfather is 10 feet taller and 20 tons heavier than your great-great-grandfather. And that spiritual one-upmanship, played out on an island you can walk across in a day, would have consequences that echo into the present, leaving you standing on a barren hill, wondering how it all went so wrong. You've hiked back down from the lonely summit of Teravaka, that 360-degree view of the ocean now permanently burned into your brain. The scale of the isolation is a done deal. Now you need to face the scale of the work. You walk along the coastline where the wind is a constant, damp companion. The ground is littered with black volcanic rock, or aya, so sharp it feels like walking across a field of broken glass. And then, you arrive at one of the great coastal platforms. This isn't a lone statue. This is a full-fledged ceremonial center. This is Ahu Tongariki, the most magnificent of them all. You stop. You just stop. Because your brain needs a moment to process the visual information. Lined up in a row, standing shoulder to shoulder on a massive stone platform nearly 700 feet long, are 15 Moai. 15. They are all facing inland, their backs to the roaring Pacific. They are the silent guardians of a village that has long since turned to dust. The scale is frankly offensive. It makes a mockery of any construction project you've ever seen. The largest of these figures is over 30 feet tall and weighs an estimated 86 tons. That's the weight of a blue whale, or 70-something Toyota Corollas stacked up. And they moved it. They moved it, and then they lifted it onto this 15-foot-high platform. You walk closer, your footsteps silent on the grass. You are staring at the intersection of engineering, obsession, and belief. The platform itself, the Ahu, is a masterpiece. The stones that form the seawall, the part facing the ocean, are enormous, irregular boulders, fitted together like a jigsaw puzzle designed by a drunken giant. But the inner wall, the part the Moai stand on, is different. It's made of precise rectangular basalt slabs fitted so tightly you couldn't slip a credit card between them. This right here is one of the big arguments. Historians still argue whether this meticulous mortarless stonework, so reminiscent of what the Inca were doing in Peru, is proof of trans-Pacific contact, or if the Rapa Nui simply figured out, independently, that this was the most earthquake-proof way to build a wall. When you're on a volcanic island, you learn to build things that can move a little. You're standing at the foot of one of these giants. You crane your neck and it feels like you're looking up at a 6-story building. The face is long, the chin is jutting, the brow is heavy and severe. The lips are thin, pursed in what looks like a pout of eternal, disappointed judgment. The body is just a torso, ending at the waist with long, slender arms carved in low relief down the sides. The hands are barely suggested, the fingers long and stylized meeting over the abdomen. This was not a portrait. It was an icon. It's the standardized, accepted image of a deified ancestor, a visual telephone line to the spiritual realm, or mana. And they are also similar. The same features, repeated over and over. It's like a brand, the ancestor brand, new from the Rapa Nui spiritual workshop. You can almost hear the committee meeting. No, the chin needs to be more disdainful, and the earlobes. Longer, much longer. It's a joke, but it's also true. The elongated earlobes are a distinct feature, reflecting a cultural practice of ear stretching that denoted high status. This is what baffled the first European visitors. When the Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen stumbled upon the island on Easter Sunday, 1722, giving it the name we, unfortunately, still use, he and his crew just couldn't compute what they were seeing. His logs described the statues with bewildered awe, noting that the people they met had no large timber for construction and no heavy-duty ropes. They saw people prostrating themselves before these giants, and they couldn't figure out the how. They saw a barren island and impossible engineering, and the two things did not add up. Roggeveen noted the Rapa Nui set fires before them and kneeled. He just assumed they were gods. You walk along the line of 15, you see the variations. Some are slightly fatter, some thinner. Some have a more pronounced V-neck at the collarbone. But the overwhelming impression is one of uniformity and impossible weight. You try to get into the mind of the person who commissioned this. You're a clan chief. Your neighbor just put up a 25-foot ancestor. You can't just let that stand. It's a spiritual affront. It's a mana gap. You go to the quarry and you place an order. I want what he has, but 30 feet, and make him look extra disappointed. And I want him moved across the island by next Tuesday. The logistics are staggering, not just the carving, but the social organization. You need to feed the carvers. You need to house the rope pullers. You need to have a society so stable, so well-fed, and so collectively blindly bought into this belief system that hundreds of people would dedicate their lives to this non-utilitarian, back-breaking, ridiculously dangerous work. All for a statue. All to prove your connection to the gods was stronger than the other guys. It's the most magnificent and terrifying pissing contest in human history. You've been awestruck by the 15 giants at Ahu Tongariki. You've stood in their shadows and felt the crushing weight of their mana. But those are the finished products. That's the showroom floor. To understand the mystery, you have to go to the factory. And the factory, the nursery, the womb of all these stone gods, is a place called Ranoraraku. You drive inland, toward the eastern side of the island. You see a volcano that looks different from the others. It's not just a grassy cone. Its slopes are lumpy, and as you get closer, the lumps take on familiar shapes. You park, and you walk, and the scene that unfolds in front of you is perhaps the most iconic and strangest archaeological site on planet Earth. You are standing on the outer slope of a volcanic crater, and there are moai everywhere. They are not neatly arranged on platforms. They are scattered, chaotic, half-buried, tilted at drunken angles. There are hundreds of them. Some are standing upright, but buried up to their necks in the soil. These are the famous Easter Island heads you've seen in 1,000 photographs. But here's the first mind-blowing yet simple truth. They are not heads. They are full statues. You're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. Centuries of erosion and sediment, washing down from the quarry slopes above, have buried them, leaving only their solemn, judgmental faces exposed to the wind. In 2012, archaeologists excavated 2 of them, revealing their full torsos. The stylized hands, the V-neck collars, all perfectly preserved underground, some even with traces of ceremonial pigment. You walk among them. It feels like a garden of giants, a silent, sleeping army. This is the nursery. This single volcano is the source of 95% of all moai on the island. Why here? You bend down and touch the rock. It's not the hard, black Aya basalt you've been walking on at the coast. This is tough. It's compressed volcanic ash. and it's the perfect medium. When it's fresh in the quarry, it's comparatively soft, just hard enough to hold its shape but soft enough to be worked. This is the key mainstream fact. The Rapa Nui, lacking any metal, could carve this tuff using toki, handheld adzes made from the harder basalt found elsewhere on the island. Then, once the statue was carved and exposed to the elements, the surface of the tuff would harden or case harden, making it more durable. It was a geological gift. You hike further up the slope, and the garden of buried giants gives way to the quarry itself. This is where your brain short-circuits. The entire cliff face is a sculpture. You are looking at the negative space of the Moai. All along the rock face are huge rectangular niches, perfectly statue-shaped, where a Moai was birthed. It looks like a gigantic version of a plastic model kit, where you can see the empty outlines where the TIE fighters and X-Wings used to be. And they're not all empty. You see Moai in every conceivable stage of creation. Some are just faint outlines, a sketch in the rock. Others are fully formed with their faces, hands, and bodies complete, but still attached to the cliff face by a thin keel or spine of rock along their backs. They are lying on their backs, facing the sky, as if sleeping. You can walk right up to them. You can see the tool marks, the chink marks left by the basalt toki 1,000 years ago. You can almost hear it. The noise must have been deafening. Not just one or two guys. Hundreds of carvers all clinging to this rock face, chipping away day in and day out in a cloud of gritty, lung-clogging dust. It's not the peaceful, artistic reverie you might imagine. This was an industrial site. It was loud, dangerous, and must have been managed with incredible precision. Historians still argue whether these carvers were a specialized high-status guild, almost like religious artists, or if this was a conscripted labor force with each clan required to send its men to the quarry to work on their ancestor statues as a form of tax or tribute, probably a bit of both. You can imagine the project manager. Team 3, the left earlobe on Ancestor 7B, is looking a little thin. Fix it, or no sweet potatoes for you. A bad joke, but the logistics are staggering. You had to feed these crews. You had to bring them water. You had to have a society stable enough to support this massive full-time workforce of non-essential, in a survival sense, artists. The sheer number of them is what gets you. There are 397 Moai still here, in or around Rano Raraku. Finished, unfinished, broken, buried. 397, more than were ever successfully transported to the coastal Ahu. The place is a graveyard of abandoned projects. You see a massive crack in one nearly finished face, a fatal flaw in the rock, discovered after months or even years of work. All that effort, wasted. You can practically hear the dough, echoing across the centuries. But others look perfect. They look finished, just waiting to be detached and moved. And they were just left. It's this feeling of interruption that is so haunting. It doesn't look like a factory that slowly went out of business. It looks like a place where one afternoon a whistle blew that no one alive today ever heard, and everyone just dropped their tools and walked away, never to return. That feeling of sudden, absolute interruption hangs heavy in the air, a question mark carved into the volcano itself. You're still standing in the quarry of Rano Raraku, surrounded by the sleeping and the stillborn. You almost feel like you should be whispering. It feels like you've stumbled into a workshop where the owners are just on a lunch break, a 500-year-long lunch break. You look at the rock face, at the perfectly formed niches, and you ask the obvious question, how? Not how did they move them, we'll get to that, but how did they carve them? You're imagining complex tools, maybe some long-lost technology. You're wrong. You look down. The ground isn't just dirt and grass, it's littered with them. Tools. You bend over and, metaphorically of course, don't touch the archaeology, you monster. You pick one up. It's a rock. It's a dense, heavy, teardrop-shaped piece of black basalt. This is a toki. It's a hand adze. And it is the only tool, the primary technology that built this entire island's worth of gods. It's the Stone Age equivalent of a hammer and chisel all in one. There's no handle. You just hold it. It's a profoundly simple, brutal, and effective piece of tech. Here is the central, non-mysterious fact. The Moai are made from volcanic tuff, which is basically compressed hardened ash. On the Mohs scale of hardness, it's pretty soft, maybe a 3. But this toki in your hand is basalt. It's a much harder, denser volcanic rock, coming in around a 6 on the same scale. The entire Rapa Nui engineering marvel boils down to this. You hit a soft rock with a harder rock. A lot. For a very, very long time. You can feel the process. You grip the toki. It's heavy, maybe 3 or 4 pounds. You wouldn't be using this for delicate scraping cuts. This was a percussion instrument. The carvers would peck at the tough chink, 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 bruising and pulverizing the surface, chipping off small flakes, slowly, agonizingly, sculpting the rock by sheer brute force. You can see the scalloped tool marks on the unfinished statues, a testament to this percussive technique. This wasn't Michelangelo releasing a figure from marble. This was a construction crew, and their main job was dust making. You can almost taste it. A thick, gritty past in your mouth, lung-clogging cloud of volcanic dust that must have enveloped this entire quarry, day in and day out. The noise would have been a deafening, percussive roar. A 1,000-man drum solo played on the side of a mountain. And here's the quirky tidbit. The Rapa Nui treated their toki as completely disposable. The quarry floor isn't just littered with them. In some places, it is made of them. Archaeologists have found tens of thousands of toki fragments. The basalt, while hard, is also brittle. The edge of the tool would chip or get dull, or the entire thing would crack from the constant impact. And the carver? He wouldn't stop sigh and go find a sharpening stone. He'd just drop it. He'd toss it over his shoulder, grab a fresh one from a pile, and keep going. This was not an artisanal craft shop. This was an industrial-scale manufacturing line. The toki were the disposable razor blades of the Rapa Nui Empire. Historians still argue whether this was just a job or if it was a sacred ritual act. When a carver was birthing an ancestor from the stone, was he just a laborer or was he a priest? Was the toki just a tool? Or was it imbued with its own mana to perform the act? Given the sheer, backbreaking, repetitive nature of the work, it's hard to imagine the guy at the top, chipping away at the 400th earlobe of his career, was feeling a deep, spiritual connection. He was probably just thinking about lunch. Great. Chicken and sweet potatoes again. I'd kill for a seabird egg. But it wasn't all just blunt force trauma. You look at the finished faces, the sharp line of the nose, the thin, pursed lips, the deep shadowed eye sockets. How did they get that detail with a 4-pound rock? They didn't. They had a whole toolkit. The big toki were for roughing out the shape. Then smaller, sharper toki would be used for the medium detail work. For the really fine lines, they would use flakes of obsidian, the black volcanic glass that's so sharp it's still used in some modern surgical scalpels. They had a natural X-Acto knife. And to get those smooth, perfect, curved surfaces, to buff out the tool marks, they used pumice, another volcanic gift rock. It's abrasive, a natural sandpaper. They would just grab a block and rub, for hours, days, weeks. You stand there, the imaginary toki heavy in your hand. This is the solution to the engineering mystery. It's not a mystery of technology, it's a mystery of sociology. The tools were simple. The organization was the complex part. The ability to mobilize and feed a workforce of hundreds, to have them all believe in the work, and to keep them pecking away, day after day, for centuries. That is the marvel. The Rapa Nui didn't have lasers. They had patience, they had manpower, and they had a singular island-wide obsession. You look at this simple, brutal tool, a testament to human ingenuity, and then you look up, and you see the biggest what-if on the entire island. You've got that imaginary toki in your hand. You've absorbed the brutal simplicity of the hard rock hits soft rock technique, and you're starting to feel like you understand the process. You're getting it. You see the scale, you see the method, you see the industrial level commitment, and just as you're feeling that little spark of comprehension that, I see, the island decides to humble you. Utterly. You follow a path inside the inner quarry, and you turn a corner, and you see it. The carvers, the managers, the clan chiefs. They were not satisfied with their 30-foot, 80-ton monstrosities. That was, apparently, child's play. In front of you, still lying on its back, still fused to the bedrock of the volcano, is the project that broke the system. They call it Te Tokanga, but it's more famously known as El Gigante, the giant. And it is. Your jaw doesn't just drop, it unhinges. This is a joke. It has to be. The other Moai, the big ones, would be toys next to this. You are staring at a single, unbroken, unfinished statue that is nearly 72 feet long. That's 22 meters. It's the height of a 7-story building, lying on its back. The estimated weight, had it ever been completed and detached, is 270 tons. Let's put that in perspective. That's not a blue whale anymore. That's 3 blue whales. That is a fully loaded Boeing 747, and then some, and they were carving it with the same little handheld toki you were just looking at. You walk its length. You start at the chin, which is larger than your car. You walk past the pursed lips, each one the size of a park bench. You walk past the nose. You walk past the long sloping torso, the hands carved in low relief. You keep walking. You're still walking. You finally reach the feet, which are just an uncarved block of stone where the work stopped. It is so vast, so disproportionate to everything else, that it rewrites the rules. This wasn't just another order. This was an act of pure, unadulterated, glorious megalomania. The chief who commissioned this wasn't just in a pissing contest. He was trying to end the sport forever. It's almost finished. The face is done. The body is shaped. The carvers had done 90% of the work. It is still attached to the cliff face by its spine, that keel of rock, but the vast majority of the sculpting is complete. And this is the ultimate, what were you thinking? Moment. The sheer logistics of this are not just daunting, they are physically impossible given the known technology. Historians still argue whether El Gigante was ever, in a million years, intended to be moved. Was this a genuine, if spectacularly over-ambitious project? Did the project manager, a man whose name is lost to history but who was probably the most stressed-out human on Earth, have an actual plan? Okay, team, for the 270-ton one we're going to need, all the ropes, and all the trees. And a miracle, maybe 2 miracles. Or was it something else? Was it a symbolic gesture? Was it intended to be a permanent god, forever bound to the womb of the volcano, Rano Raraku? A guardian of the quarry itself, a mana battery wired directly to the mountain never meant to see the coast? We don't know. But the fact that it's here shatters all our nice, neat theories about standard Moai production. This is the project that asks the uncomfortable question: did the Rapa Nui system collapse under its own weight? This statue is the metaphor. It is the ambition that outstripped the resources. It is the order that simply could not be fulfilled. You can imagine the scene. The hundreds of carvers pecking away for years, not a year or two. This single statue likely represented a decade or more of continuous labor. And one day, the chief who ordered it dies, or the toki run out, or the food supply for the workers fails, or the chief engineer finally has a nervous breakdown, throws his toki into the grass, and just goes fishing. Whatever the reason, the work stopped. El Gigante is the high-water mark of Rapa Nui obsession, and it is its most colossal 270-ton failure. And here's a quirky, if sad, tidbit. The Rapa Nui had to know this was insane. The carvers themselves, the men doing the pecking, they would have known the physics. They knew what an 80-ton statue felt like. They knew the ropes, the levers, the friction. They must have been chipping away at this thing, looking at each other and thinking, he's joking, right? We're not really going to try and move this, are we? It's a testament to the power of the mana belief system that they even tried, that they got this far. It's the ancient world equivalent of being asked to build a skyscraper out of gingerbread. You stand in its shadow. It is so big that it creates its own weather system, blocking the constant wind. It is silent, sleeping, and a monument to the moment that more finally became too much. You step back from the mind-boggling hubris of El Gigante. It's a showstopper, a conversation ender. It's the project that proves the ambition, but it doesn't explain the system. To understand that, you have to look at the dozens of other, more modest quarry niches all around you. You find one that's a more standard size, a 20-footer, a respectable 40-ton ancestor. The niche is empty, a perfect Moai-shaped hole in the cliff. But the ghosts of the workers are still here. Look closer. You're not looking at the work of one brilliant tortured artist. This isn't Rodin's studio. This is a factory floor. This is carving by committee, by team. You have to picture it. You're a project manager for the Hanga clan. You've got your order. One 20-foot ancestor, standard model with the disappointed expression. You go to the quarry. You find your assigned patch of rock. What now? First, the master carver, a high-status specialist probably, would outline the figure on the rock, maybe using a chalky pigment. He'd mark the center line, the angle of the head, the placement of the arms. This was the blueprint. Then, the teams would descend. You have to imagine a scaffolding system, probably made from lashed-together bits of wood, back when they still had wood, or maybe just ropes slung from the top of the cliff. The carvers wouldn't be working from the bottom up. They'd be working on all of it, all at once. You'd have one team of 5 or 6 men clinging to the rock face working on the head and face. Chink, chink, chink goes the chorus of their toki. They are the detail guys. They have to get the nose right, the lips thin, the brow heavy. A mistake here, a slip of the toki, and the whole statue is ruined. Sorry, Chief, I accidentally gave Great-Grandpa a smile. That's a career-ending move. Maybe a life-ending one. Below them, another team would be working on the long torso. This is the grunt work, just pulverizing rock, clearing away the mass of tuff between the arms and the body, shaping the long, elegant lines. And at the bottom, another team, working in the trench that was being dug around the statue, defining the base, chipping away at the sides. It was a symphony of percussive chaos. The air would be unbreathable, a thick, gritty fog of gray-brown dust that would coat your skin, fill your lungs, and turn your sweat into a muddy paste. The noise would be a constant, sharp crack as thousands of basalt toki struck the tuff, echoing off the crater walls. This brings us to the mainstream and most staggering fact of the carving process: the time. We aren't talking weeks. Based on replicarving experiments and analysis of the quarry, archaeologists estimate that a team of about 5 to 6 carvers, working all day, every day, would take about 1 full year to complete a single average-sized moai. 1 year for one statue. And that's just the carving. That's not moving it. That's not raising it. That's just getting it ready in the quarry. Now look around. There are hundreds of them. The math is just, it's overwhelming. It implies a society so stable, so well-fed from its sweet potato and chicken farms, that it could afford to have this many skilled and unskilled laborers tied up on these non-utilitarian, mana-based public works projects for centuries. Archaeologists still debate the exact nature of these teams. Were they full-time professionals? A high-status guild who did nothing but carve and were paid in food and status? Or was this a seasonal obligation? Maybe during the non-planting season, all the able-bodied men from a clan had to report to Rano Raraku for quarry duty. It's the ancient equivalent of being drafted for jury duty, but instead of sitting in a boring room, you're hanging off a cliff for 3 months, inhaling rock dust, and carving a god. And here's a quirky thought. Think about the project management. How do you keep morale up? How do you ensure quality control when you've got 20 different teams from 20 different clans all working in the same quarry? You can almost imagine a foreman walking the lines. Looking good, Team 5. The disdain in those nostrils is perfect. Team 6. That earlobe is a mess. You're chipping on your own time tonight. It's a funny mental image, but it points to a complex social structure. You need bosses. You need rules. You need a system for allocating quarry space, for feeding the crews, for settling disputes when one team's dust cloud is choking out the team below them. The Rapa Nui, it seems, were not just master carvers. They were master-level bureaucrats and project managers. And all of that focus, all of that industrial-level organization, was leading to one single terrifyingly delicate moment. The step after the carving was done. So you're standing in the quarry, and you've just seen the teams of carvers in your mind's eye pecking away for a solid year. The foreman has done his final quality control check. The nose is sharp, the earlobes are long, The expression is the perfect blend of ancestral pride, and I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. The statue is, for all intents and purposes, finished. But there's a problem, it's still attached. It's lying on its back, facing the sky, but it's still fused to the bedrock of Rano Raraku by a long, thick spine of rock running down its back. It's a god in progress, but it's not a Moai yet. It's just a very elaborate part of the mountain. Now comes the hard part. No, the terrifying part. The part that makes a year of chipping dust seem like a relaxing day at the spa. They have to detach it. This is not a job for the chink, chink, chink construction crew. This is a job for the extraction specialists. This is the bomb defusal squad of the Rapa Nui world. You have to get this in your head. You cannot just break it off. This is 80 tons of carefully sculpted, relatively soft tuff. If you put pressure in the wrong place, it will crack. A hairline fracture, invisible to the naked eye, could become a catastrophic failure halfway down the road to the Ahu. If it cracks, the mana is gone. The ancestor is dead. And the last year of your clan's work, the mountains of sweet potatoes you fed the carvers, the toki you've shattered by the thousand, all of it is for nothing. The chief will not be pleased. So the extraction team gets to work. This is the mainstream and deeply claustrophobic fact. They had to tunnel under the statue. The carvers would lie on their backs in the narrow, dark, suffocating trench they had already dug around the Moai. They would be wedged in, their faces inches from the 80-ton belly of the stone god above them, and they would start to chip away at that central keel. Tink, tink, tink. This is not a job for the faint of heart. The Rapa Nui job application must have been very specific. Must be comfortable in tight, dark spaces with 80,000 pounds of unstable rock directly above your sternum. Must not be prone to panic. Benefits include extra chicken. You can just imagine it. The air is thick with dust. Your only light is the sliver of sun from above, or maybe a small, smoky candle nut flame. Your sweat is mud, and with every tink of your basalt toki, you're not just chipping the rock. You're listening. You're feeling the vibration. You are having a very intimate, very high-stakes conversation with the stone, and you're praying it doesn't answer back with a crack. Historians still argue whether this was a purely technical act or a deeply ritual one. Were they chanting? Were they singing in rhythm to coordinate their chipping? Or was it just dead, terrified silence, broken only by the tink, tink, tink and the sound of men's hearts pounding in their ears? The acoustics in the quarry are strange, and it's easy to believe a rhythmic chant would be the only way to keep a dozen men, all lying in a trench, working in unison. But here is the genius part, the quirky but brilliant tidbit. They weren't just chipping and praying, they were planning. All those stone chips, all that rubbish, or debitage, that the carvers had been producing for a year. That wasn't waste, they were using it. As the extraction team chipped away at the keel, other workers would be shoveling this pulverized tuff back into the trench, packing it under the statue. They were creating a custom-fitted bed, a high-density cushion. It is the Stone Age equivalent of lining the kitchen floor with a stack of old towels before you try to get that stuck jar open. You know it's going to make a sudden violent move and you have to be ready to catch it. They were ensuring that when the snap finally came, the Moai wouldn't just drop onto the hard, uneven quarry floor and crack in half. It would pop free and settle, just a few inches, onto this soft, supportive bed of its own recycled dust. You're lying there. You've been chipping for days. The keel is now terrifyingly thin. It's the width of a hand, then the width of a finger. The tink, tink, tink sounds different now. It's sharper. The rock is talking. The foreman, standing above, screams, "Everyone out." The carvers would scramble like meerkats out of the trench, and then maybe they used levers. Maybe they had the three biggest guys on the crew give a coordinated heave. Ho! Or maybe the foreman just took one last ceremonial toki, gave one final precise tap, and groan. A sound like the mountain tearing, a deep, vibrating thud that you feel in your bones. And silence. The statue is free. It has popped. It has settled onto its cushion. It is born. It is no longer part of the volcano. It is its own 80-ton, terrifyingly fragile, brand new thing. You can imagine the crew just collapsing in on themselves, the tension of a year's work snapping in an instant. Okay, that's it. I'm taking my lunch break. A year-long lunch break. Wake me up when it's time to move this. But the problem, you see, is that the easy part is now over. The statue is free, but it's lying on its back in a hole on the side of a steep, dusty volcano. Now they have to get it out. The thud of that 80-ton giant settling into its dustbed still echoes in your ears. The carving is done. The detachment is complete. The statue is born. You can imagine the collective sigh of relief from the extraction crew. But the foreman is already clapping his hands. All right, break's over. Now we get it to the coast and you just look at him. You wanna, what? The statue is free, but it's in a hole on its back on the side of a steep volcano. The next step is a masterclass in low-tech, high-stakes physics. You can't just lift it, but you can slide it. The teams would get to work, not under the statue anymore, but in front of it. They would begin excavating a massive ramp, digging away the slope below the statue's head, creating a gentle or maybe not so gentle path leading downhill. As they dug, they'd use that same rubble and tuff to build up the ramp, smoothing the way. Then, using massive levers, probably the last of the island's big palm trees, they would slowly, painfully nudge the statue. Pry and slip. Pry and slip. They'd shift its weight, getting it to slide out of its niche, out of its birth hole and onto the ramp. It would move, inches at a time, with the sound of 1,000 teeth grinding. And once it was on that ramp, gravity, for the first time, would become their partial friend. The statue would be on its back, facing the sky, and they would begin the slow, controlled slide down the outer slope of Rano Raraku, a process that might have taken weeks. But here's the mystery. As you, the modern visitor, walk down these same outer slopes, you realize something is deeply wrong. The slopes are covered in statues. These aren't the half-buried, neck-deep garden moai on the lower fields. These are finished statues lying on their backs or tumbled onto their faces, scattered all down the rampways. These are the statues that made it. They were successfully carved. They were successfully detached. They were successfully moved out of the quarry. And then, everyone just let go of the ropes. This is the unfinished business. This is the part that makes the hair on your neck stand up. You're not just looking at a quarry. You're looking at a loading dock where every single order was abandoned mid-shipment. You're walking through a graveyard of perfectly good, factory-fresh 80-ton ancestors. Some are lying on their backs, staring at the clouds with that same eternal, disdainful expression, as if they are mildly annoyed at being left here for 500 years. Others have slid and tumbled, cracking their perfect noses on the rocks below. This is the mainstream fact that defines the entire mystery. Of the nearly 900 moai carved, almost 400 of them, 397 to be precise, are still here, in or around Rano Raraku. The factory produced more than it ever successfully shipped. For every moai that made it to a coastal ahu, another one was left behind, forgotten. The system was running at 50% efficiency, and that's being generous. You look at El Gigante, the 270-ton failure in the quarry. That's one thing, that's ambition. But these statues, the ones abandoned on the slopes, this is something else. This is interruption. This is the whistle blew theory. It's the most compelling and haunting evidence that Rapa Nui society didn't just fade away, it snapped. Historians still argue vehemently about what that whistle was. Was it the final tree being cut? Did the society collapse into famine, with no more surplus food to feed the quarry workers, who just dropped their toki and went home to protect their sweet potato patches? Was it a sudden, brutal civil war, where the clans turned on each other and stealing your enemy's mana statue was less important than stealing your enemy's chickens? Or was it a disease, a plague that ripped through the population, leaving no one with the strength to pull the ropes? Or, and this is the quirky, and perhaps most profound, tidbit, what if it wasn't a collapse? What if it was a conversion? What if, after centuries of this moai building obsession, a new idea emerged, a prophet, a new cult? What if a new generation of Rapa Nui just woke up one day, looked at the 80-ton giant their parents were dutifully sliding down a hill and said, "Why? He's just a rock. The mana isn't in the stone. It's in the sky. What if they just stopped believing? What if the unfinished business is just the physical evidence of a society-wide religious revolution, where they didn't just drop the ropes, they threw them down in defiance? It's a terrifying thought. To abandon the work of your ancestors, to call it all a waste of time, and it would explain the silence. The quarry wasn't just abandoned, it was rejected. You're standing on that dusty slope, surrounded by the 397 silent abandoned projects. The whistle has blown, the factory is closed, and the silence is deafening. But this is only half the story. As haunting as the unfinished business is, you have to remember, they succeeded for a long, long time. Hundreds of statues did make it. They made it from this quarry, Rano Raraku, all the way to the coasts, to Ahu Tongariki, to Ahu Akivi. Some of them traveled over 11 miles. Let that sink in. 11 miles, 80 tons. Across a landscape that is not a paved freeway. It's a landscape of volcanic rock, grassy hills, and unbridged gullies. They did this without wheels, without draft animals, no horses, no oxen, and by the end, almost certainly without large trees for rollers or sleds. So, how? This is the central engineering question, the one that has launched 1,000 ancient alien YouTube channels and just as many legitimate academic careers. How did they move the Moai? When the first European explorers, like Captain Cook in 1724, asked the Rapa Nui people, the answer they got was simple. It was, in fact, too simple, and it sounded like a joke. The islanders just shrugged and said the statues walked. That's it. That's the local legend. They walked. Neka neka. The Moai, infused with the mana of the chief or the priest who commissioned them, got up on their non-existent feet and just walked. From the quarry, down the slopes, across the island, and hopped up onto their ahu. Easy peasy. And for 200 years the Western world heard this and, to be blunt, patted the Rapa Nui on the head. Oh, how quaint, they thought. What a lovely, simple, primitive myth. They're just personifying them. Obviously, they don't mean it literally. They mean the gods walked them spiritually. The explorers and archaeologists just couldn't accept this answer. It was folkloric, it was unscientific, and it was clearly a metaphor for a real transport method that the Rapa Nui had simply forgotten. So, they started inventing their own theories. This is the great, centuries-long blind spot in Rapa Nui archaeology. The native people told us how they did it, and we said, no, that's impossible. Let me, a man who just got here from Norway, tell you how your ancestors did it. This is the mainstream fact. The oral tradition, passed down for generations, is incredibly specific. It states that the Moai were commanded to walk by a chief or priest using the power of mana. The statues would shuffle along, neka neka, in a slow side-to-side motion. They traveled upright. They were alive. And this is why, for the Rapa Nui, the statues in the quarry, like El Gigante, or the ones broken in transport, weren't just failed projects. They were dead. They had lost their mana and could no longer move. Historians and archaeologists still argue, and oh boy do they argue, whether this walking description was meant to be a literal mechanical explanation, or if it was, as the early explorers assumed, a purely spiritual metaphor. Was it, we, the people, used ropes and levers in a way that mimicked walking? Or was it, our great-great-grandfather, the high chief, was so magically potent he could just will the stone to move, no ropes required? The metaphor camp seemed to be winning for a long time. It just had to be a metaphor. Because, come on, 80-ton statues don't walk. That's absurd. That's Monty Python. You can just picture the sketch. This Moai is no more. It has ceased to neek. It is an ex-parrot. I mean, an ex-statue. But the Rapa Nui were insistent. They walked. This is where the mystery gets so delicious. What if the metaphor was the mechanism? What if the myth was actually a user's manual? A set of IKEA instructions that the archaeologists had thrown in the trash because they couldn't read the language? Let's think about the statue's design. Look at one. It's not a block, it's not a pyramid. It's front-heavy. The head is massive, The chin juts out. But the base, the part where the torso is cut off, isn't flat. On the transport Moai, the ones found on the roads, not the ones on the Ahu, the base is often angled, curving downwards and forwards. They are designed almost like a modern Weeble toy to tilt. Their center of gravity is high, but their base is engineered. They are built to rock. Suddenly, the walking theory doesn't sound quite so insane. It's still crazy, but it's an interesting crazy. What if you didn't need 500 people and a forest's worth of giant logs? What if you just needed a few very smart, very coordinated teams of rope pullers? What if walking was the most elegant, low-tech and resource-light way to do it? This is the central conflict in Moai transport theory. It's the sled versus the walk, the brute force versus the elegant hula. And for a long time, the brute force theory was the only one anyone took seriously. So for centuries, the walking theory was dismissed as a charming fairy tale. It was unscientific. And in the 20th century, science loves a good, brute force, practical solution. Enter the heavyweight champion of this brute force camp, Thor Heyerdahl. You have to know Heyerdahl. He wasn't just an archaeologist. He was a full-blown, real-life adventure hero. This is the guy who in 1947 built a balsa wood raft called the Kon-Tiki and sailed it from Peru to Polynesia, just to prove that ancient South Americans could have settled the Pacific Islands. He was a rock star, and in 1955, he turned his considerable fame, funding, and stubbornness toward Easter Island. Heyerdahl arrived with a massive expedition and a massive, pre-existing theory. His theory was that the Rapa Nui, or at least its ruling class, were not Polynesians at all. He believed they were a white, bearded race, a very 1950s, slightly racist-sounding idea, who had sailed from Peru. He was convinced the Rapa Nui culture, and especially its stonework, had Incan roots. The Moai to him were just a Pacific version of Andean megaliths. Remember that Ahu stonework that looked like Incan walls? That was his Exhibit A. So when he heard the walking story, he laughed it off just like everyone else. It didn't fit his narrative. His South American colonists wouldn't have used magic. They would have used engineering. And to him, engineering meant brute force. He was absolutely convinced the statues were moved lying flat on their backs, or maybe their faces, on a giant wooden sled. This is the mainstream fact. Heyerdahl decided to prove it. He didn't just write a paper, he staged an event. This was the first major experimental archaeology on the island. He commissioned a group of Rapa Nui, who, it should be noted, were descendants of the original carvers, to carve a new small Moai, about 12 tons. They did it, using old toki found in the quarry, proving the carving method was still, just barely, within living memory. Then Heyerdahl had them lash this 12-ton statue to a massive Ishept sled made from the biggest pieces of timber they could find. Then he hired the locals, a lot of them. He gathered 180 Rapa Nui men, handed them massive ropes made of sisal, and told them to pull. And they did. It was a spectacle. 180 men, straining, chanting, digging their heels into the dirt. And the statue moved. Inch by agonizing inch, they dragged the Moaiona sled across the grassy field. It was a triumph. Heyerdahl filmed it, photographed it, and announced to the world, "See? Mystery solved. It was a solution. It was a way." But was it the way? Here's the scholarly debate that immediately flared up. Heyerdahl's experiment was impressive, but it had problems. First, the math. He used 180 people to move a 12-ton statue. The average Moai on an Ahu is closer to 40 tons. The big boys at Ahu Tongariki are 80-plus tons. El Gigante was 270. If 12 tons takes 180 people, what does 80 tons take? Over 1,000 people? On an island that, at its absolute peak, probably only had 10,000, 15,000 people total, including women, children, and the elderly. Could you really afford to tie up your entire able-bodied workforce just to move one statue? The numbers just don't scale. Second, and this is the big one, the wood. Heyerdahl's method is insanely resource-intensive. It requires massive, strong, straight-grained timber for the sleds. It requires more wood, likely for rollers to put under the sled, to reduce friction. His method doesn't just allow for the ecocide theory, that the Rapa Nui cut down all their trees. It demands it. In Heyerdahl's version of events, the Rapa Nui weren't just obsessed with building statues. They were obsessed with building sleds, and they fed their entire forest into this wood chipper of an industry. And here's the quirky, wonderful, and slightly sad tidbit. Decades later, some of the Rapa Nui elders who had participated in Heyerdahl's experiment were interviewed, and they essentially said, "Oh yeah, the pulling katana sled thing, that was fun. The Norwegian was paying us. He wanted us to pull, so we pulled. It was a good job. Of course, that's not how we did it. Our grandfathers told us they walked." Heyerdahl, in his confidence, had just ignored them. He had paid the keepers of the oral tradition to enact his theory, and they just let him, because why not? But the local knowledge remained. Heyerdahl's brute force method became the textbook explanation for 50 years, but on the island itself, the whisper never died. Nika Nika. They walked. You're left with this lingering, slightly awkward image of Thor Heyerdahl, a man of incredible vision, basically paying the locals to ignore their own oral history and pull a sled for his movie. It's a great scene, but it just feels wrong. It's too brute force, it's too wasteful. It just doesn't feel like the elegant, clever solution you'd expect from the people who carved these faces. And for 50 years, that's where the debate stalled. It was Team Sled versus the ghosts of the oral tradition. And then, in the 21st century, two archaeologists came along and decided to do the most radical thing imaginable. They decided to listen to the Rapa Nui. Enter Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo. These two are the modern champions of the walking theory, and they didn't just write a paper. Like Heyerdahl, they decided to do it. But they looked at the problem from a completely different angle. They didn't start with a theory from Peru. They started with the Rapa Nui oral tradition, Neki Neki. They walked, and they asked, okay, let's assume they're not idiots, and let's assume this isn't a fairy tale. If they did walk, how would that mechanically work? Their answer was brilliant, elegant, and in 2011, it completely blew up the field of Rapa Nui studies. This is the mainstream fact of the modern era. Hunt and Lipo commissioned a new replica Moai, not a small Twelton one, a 10-foot 5-ton replica built to the exact proportions of the road Moai. Remember them, the ones that fell over in transport? And they didn't get 180 people. They got 18, and they didn't use a sled. They didn't use rollers. They used 3 ropes. That's it. 3. You have to see this. You can find the videos online, and it is the most beautifully oh my god of course moment in archaeology. They stood the 5-ton statue upright. Then, they tied 2 ropes around its head, one on each side, like you're holding the reins of a very surly 5-ton horse. This is Team Rock. Then, they tied a 3rd single rope around its back. This is Team Break. And they started to walk it. The 2 rock teams on either side would pull, alternately. Team Left pulls. The statue rocks forward, tilting onto its left, forward-sloping corner of its base. It takes a step. Team Right pulls. The statue rocks forward onto its right corner. Another step. Thud, thud, thud. All the while, the break team on the back is just keeping tension, making sure the statue doesn't get too ambitious and fall on its giant, disdainful face. It's not a fast, elegant walk. It's a shuffle, a hula, a drunken 5-ton swagger. Neka Neka. The statue literally walks down the road, rocking and waddling with a thud-thud-thud rhythm that, if you were a Rapa Nui person chanting, would be perfect for a work song. And it moves. In their experiment, the 18-person team, compare that to Heyerdahl's 180, moved their 5-ton statue several hundred yards, uphill in some places, in a matter of hours. It was shockingly efficient, both in manpower and in resources. It requires no wood, no rollers, no sleds, just good rope, a solid sense of rhythm, and a lot of mana. This experiment changed everything. It proved the walking theory wasn't magic, it was physics. It recontextualized the entire Rapa Nui design. Why are the Moai top-heavy? To help them rock. Why is the base sloped and curved? To act as a foot for them to pivot on. Why do they all look like they're leaning forward? Because they were. They were designed from the quarry to be walked. The statue wasn't just a piece of art. It was a vehicle. Of course, the scholarly debate didn't just end. Oh no. The Team Sled camp, and yes, it still exists, fired back immediately. Your experiment is a joke. Your 5-ton replica is tiny. The 80-ton ones would have shattered. They argue that this walking motion, this constant thud-thud-thud, would put incredible stress on the statue, especially at the ankles, and would chip the base to pieces. But Hunt and Lipo had an answer for that too. They went and looked at the road Moai, the ones that had fallen, broken, during transport, and they found chips. They found that the bases of these statues, the ones that had died on the road, were covered in chips and breakages exactly like you'd expect from a thing that was being waddled for miles over rocky terrain. The damage wasn't a flaw in the theory, it was evidence for it. And here's the quirky, brilliant tidbit. This theory also explains why the statues on the road, the broken ones, are found in the weird places they are. If you're dragging an 80-ton sled, Heyerdahl's method, you go around the hills. You follow the path of least resistance. But if you're walking a statue, going downhill is your nightmare. The statue wants to get away from you to fall on its face. Going uphill, however, that's easy. The brake rope team just relaxes, and the rock teams just lean into it. Hunt and Lipo's theory suggests the Rapa Nui aimed for the hills, taking a harder but more controlled path. It's so counterintuitive, and it fits the archaeological record perfectly. It just feels right. It's an elegant solution from an elegant people. It's a solution that uses cleverness over brute force. And most importantly, it's a solution that says to the original Rapa Nui people, we hear you. You told us they walked. And you know what? We finally believe you. It just feels so right, that naked waddle, the 18-person crew, the 3 ropes, the elegant physics. It's a solution that honors the Rapa Nui's cleverness. But Hunt and Lipo's walking theory had another piece of evidence, something that had been staring archaeologists in the face for a century, but no one knew how to read it. You're standing on it right now. It's a road. And you have to use air quotes when you say that. Because this is not a road in any sense you understand. It's not a paved Roman via. It's not a cobblestone street. It's not even a gravel track. It's a feature. It's a wide, shallow, cleared earth depression, winding its way through the tall, windswept grass. To the untrained eye, it just looks like a place where the grass is a little thinner. But when you get low, or see it from the air, you realize it's a network. A massive island-wide network of deliberate, engineered paths. This is the mainstream, and frankly, underrated fact of Rapa Nui engineering, the Moai, or Moai roads. This wasn't just a case of, hey, let's just push this 80-ton god through the bushes and hope for the best. This was a planned, coordinated national infrastructure project. Archaeologists have traced at least 12 miles, 20 kilometers of these formal roads, and there were likely many more. They connect the factory, Rano Raraku, to the showrooms, the coastal Ahu. It was the Rapa Nui interstate system, and its only cargo was gods. But like everything on this island, the roads are the source of a giant screaming academic argument. This is the central scholarly debate about them. Were they just transport paths? Were they purely functional, just superhighways designed to get a statue from point A to point B? Or were they ceremonial avenues? The ceremonial camp has a pretty good argument. For one, these roads are wide. Unnecessarily wide. Some are over 30 feet across. Why? Your walking Moai is maybe 10-12 feet wide at the shoulders. You don't need a 3-lane highway for a one-god parade. The ceremonialists argue that the width was for people. The road wasn't just for the statue, it was for the procession. You have to imagine it. The 80-ton ancestor walking slowly down the middle, thud, 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 while on either side, the entire clan walks with it. Hundreds of people, chanting, singing, drumming, the priests making offerings. The road wasn't just a way to move the manna, it was a stage to celebrate it. The transport camp, like Hunt and Lipo, fires back. Okay, sure, it was a party. But the design of the road is pure function. And this is where it gets brilliant. This is the quirky tidbit that ties it all together. The Rapa Nui roads are not flat. In many of the best preserved sections, they are distinctly concave. They have a V shape, or maybe a U shape, like a shallow boat hull, sloping gently from the edges down to the center. For 100 years, archaeologists looked at this and scratched their heads. It made no sense. If you're using Thor Heyerdahl's sled method, a concave road is the last thing you want. But Hunt and Lipo looked at that V-shaped road and they smiled. Because if you're walking a 80-ton top-heavy waddling statue, a flat road is your enemy. The statue could walk right off the path, fall into a gully and crack. Job over. Mana gone. But a concave road, a V-shape, that's not a bug. It's a feature. It's a cradle. As the statue waddles, thud, 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 it naturally wants to stay in the lowest point. The V-shape guides it. It keeps the 80-ton drunken giant centered. If it starts to veer off to the left, the slope of the V gently encourages it to waddle back to the middle. It's not a road, it's a guide rail. It's the ancient world equivalent of the rumble strip on the side of a modern highway. But instead of just waking you up, it actively saves your 80-ton ancestor from a fatal crash. This right here is why the walking theory is so compelling. It doesn't just explain the statues, it explains the roads they walked on. It takes two separate, baffling mysteries and solves them with each other. It's a 2-for-1 deal in archaeological theory. It's elegant. It's clever. And it, once again, proves that the Rapa Nui were not just brute force laborers. They were brilliant, subtle, low-tech physicists. They didn't have bulldozers to flatten the land. So they shaped the land to fit their method. You're walking down the center of one of these Moai, this V-shaped god cradle. The walking theory from Hunt and Lipo feels like a warm, satisfying cup of coffee. It just fits. The concave road, the waddling motion, the elegant physics, it all locks into place. It's the perfect, of course, solution, and you feel a little smug for having figured it out. Or, for having listened to the people who figured it out. You're walking along, feeling good about the cleverness of the Rapa Nui, and then you trip over the evidence. You see it. Lying just off the road, half buried in the grass, it's a Moai, and it is not on a platform. It is not standing. It's on its face. It's a complete 40-ton faceplant. This is the friction of failure. This is the oh crap moment, frozen in stone, that the V-shaped roads were designed to prevent. Because the walking method, while brilliant and low resource, is not stable. It's a high-wire act with an 80-ton superstar. The statue is always in a state of controlled falling, and sometimes the control is lost. You're looking at what archaeologists call a road Moai. This is one that died in transit, and this is the crucial mainstream fact. These road failures are not random. They follow a very specific and very telling pattern. The statue you're looking at, the one on its face, it's on a downhill slope. And the ones found on uphill slopes, overwhelmingly, they are found on their backs. This is not a contradiction of the walking theory. This is its most powerful, most conclusive, smoking gun piece of evidence. Think about it. If you are waddling an 80-ton, top-heavy statue down a hill, what is the single catastrophic nightmare scenario? The statue gets away from you. The brake rope team, the guys at the back, they slip. The tension is lost for a second. The statue's forward rocking naked becomes a forward lurch. It pitches forward, past its center of gravity. You can hear the screams of the rock teams as they drop the side ropes and run for their lives, and then, thwump crack, a sound that echoes across the island. The 80-ton giant slams, face first into the earth. It is the most expensive I've fallen and I can't get up moment in Polynesian history. And the opposite is true for going uphill. You're rocking it forward, thud, thud, thud. It's a brutal, heavy pull job. The brake team at the back is just chilling. The rock teams are pulling. What happens if they lose the rhythm? If one rope pulls too hard, the other not hard enough? The statue lurches, loses its footing and falls backwards. It falls supine right onto the backs of the brake team, who hopefully have already scattered. This pattern is exactly what walking predicts, and it's the opposite of what a sled predicts. A sled, if it breaks, just sits there, or it slides off the road, but it would stay flat. It wouldn't trip. The Moai on the roads didn't break. They tripped. They were walking, and they fell. Historians still argue whether these failures were a catastrophic, mana-destroying and off the line for the chief who commissioned it, or just an accepted cost of doing business. Was it whelp? We lost one. That's the 5% breakage rate. Send another order to the quarry. Or was it, the gods have rejected your ancestor. Your mana is dead. Your clan is shamed, forever. Given the sheer permanence of the failure, you have to imagine it was the latter. This is a failure so complete you can't bury it. You can't delete it from your browser history. It is just there, for 500 years, reminding everyone that your ancestors' team had one job. And here's the quirky and telling tidbit. What did they do with these 40-ton face-down dead statues? Did they try to fix them? Did they salvage the stone? No. You are looking at a tapu object. It's taboo. It's spiritually contaminated. The mana is gone, and it might even be dangerous. It's a 40-ton monument to don't. The Rapa Nui, in a show of what looks like nope, not touching it, just left it. They abandoned it right where it fell. A colossal broken warning to every other transport team. Don't be like Throg's team. Keep that back rope tight. You stand over this fallen giant, its once proud, disdainful face now buried in the dirt. The silence is profound. You can feel the ghost of that crack, the sudden horrified silence of the transport crew, the air thick with the smell of failure and probably the smell of the chief's impending, catastrophic rage. This is the friction. This is the risk. And as you look up from this fallen god, you look out at the barren, rolling, treeless landscape. And you have to ask, all this effort, this walking, this quarrying, this obsession, it was all powered by something, by people. People who needed wood for their houses, wood for their canoes, wood for their fires, and perhaps wood for the very transport system that started it all. You're standing over that 40-ton faceplant, the wind whistling through the tall grass, and that's when it hits you. It's not what you're seeing that's the problem. It's what you're not seeing. Trees. You've been walking for hours, and you haven't seen a single thing that provides shade. The landscape is a beautiful, rolling, barren grassland. But Rapa Nui wasn't always like this. This is not its natural state. When the first Polynesian settlers arrived here, in their double-hulled canoes, they didn't find a field of grass. They found a paradise, a subtropical forest, dense with the tree. You have to understand the island was once covered by the Rapa Nui palm. This isn't just a tree. Based on pollen analysis from the crater lakes, we know this was the largest palm tree in the world. It was a monster, growing over 100 feet tall and 6 feet in diameter. It was a thick, straight, massive column of timber. And by the time Captain Cook arrived in 1774, there wasn't a single one left. They were extinct. This is the palm tree predicament, and it is the ghost at the feast of every Moai transport theory. This brings us back to the great debate. Remember Thor Heyerdahl and his brute force sled? This is the mainstream ecocide theory, popularized by authors like Jared Diamond. Heyerdahl's method is insanely wood-hungry. To move an 80-ton statue on a sled, you need a massive sled, built from the biggest timbers you can find. But you can't just drag a sled over dirt. The friction would be impossible. You need rollers. Hundreds of them. You'd be paving the Moai with a constantly moving carpet of logs. To move one statue, you might have to fell a dozen of these giant palms. Now multiply that by the 500 or so statues that made it to their ahu. This theory paints a very clear and very tragic picture. The Rapa Nui, locked in their mana-obsessed bigger statue arms race, literally fed their entire forest into the wood chipper of their religion. They cut down the last tree to move the last statue and then collapse. Starvation, civil war, the great toppling. It's a perfect, terrible morality tale. But what about the walking theory? Hunt and Lipo's elegant 18-person neka neka? That's the beauty of it, isn't it? It requires no wood, no sled, no rollers. It's a green transport solution. It completely short-circuits the classic ecocide narrative. Or does it? You walk the statue with 3 ropes. But where do you get rope? You can't just braid grass, you need strong, reliable, load-bearing rope. Rope that can handle the 80-ton thud of a walking god. And that rope came from the hau-hau tree, a relative of the sea hibiscus, whose bark could be stripped and woven into incredibly strong cordage. The walking theory doesn't need the Rapa Nui palm, but it absolutely needs the hau-hau forest. The walking theory saves the palms, but it dooms the hau-hau. And so the scholarly debate rages on. Was the deforestation a direct result of the statue transport, or was it something more mundane? Historians still argue fiercely whether the Moai project was the cause of the collapse, or just the symptom of a society at its peak right before it fell. What if the trees weren't cut for rollers? What if they were cut for canoes? The islanders were deep-sea fishermen, they needed boats. What if they were cut for firewood? A population of 15,000 people needs to cook its sweet potatoes. Or, what if the forest was cleared simply to plant those sweet potatoes? The slash-and-burn agriculture to feed the 15,000 people, including the hundreds of carvers and rope pullers. The Moai may not have directly eaten the forest, but the society that built the Moai certainly did. And here's the quirky and controversial tidbit. What if it wasn't just the humans? On those first canoes there was a stowaway, the Polynesian rat, or Kiore, and the Kiore loved the Rapa Nui palm. Specifically, they loved its sweet, nutritious nuts. Archaeologists have found thousands of palm nut casings in caves, all of them gnawed open by rats. So, picture this. The humans are cutting down the big adult trees for their canoes and farms, and the rats are swarming the forest floor, eating all the seedlings. The humans were logging the forest and the rats were eating its children. It was a perfect storm of deforestation, a death by 1,000 cuts and 1,000,000 nibbles. You stand on that hill. The wind is the only sound. The walking theory is so clever. The sled theory is so tragic. The rat theory is, well, it's a bit of a downer. Whatever the cause, the effect is all around you. It is a world without trees. And this new, barren landscape would create a brand new, even more baffling engineering problem. Getting the 80-ton giant off the road and onto its platform. You're standing on that treeless, barren hill. You've seen the fallen, tripped giants. You've accepted the ecological cost. And now, you've followed the Ara Moai, the V-shaped god cradle, to its final destination. You're at the coast. You're at Ahu Tongariki, the platform with the 15 giants. The walking is over. The statue has arrived. But you're looking at a 15-foot-high wall of meticulously fitted stone. And your 80-ton ancestor is, let's say, lying face down on the grass in front of it, tired from its 11-mile walk. The job is not done. In fact, the hardest part, the part that makes walking it look like a casual stroll, is about to begin. You have to do two things, both of which sound impossible. You have to get the 80-ton, horizontal statue on top of the 15-foot-high platform. Then you have to stand it up. And you have to do this, let's remember, without a crane, without a construction-grade forklift, without hydraulics, and, by this point in Rapa Nui history, almost certainly without the 100-foot-tall, 6-foot-thick giant palm trees that the sled theory relies on. You have levers, you have ropes, and you have stones. This is the final lift, and it is, arguably, the most ingenious and pants-wettingly terrifying piece of the entire Moai puzzle. So, how do you get it up there? This is the mainstream consensus. You build a ramp. You don't try to lift the statue to the platform. You bring the ground up to the platform. The Rapa Nui, in a show of pure, stubborn, brute force logic, would construct a massive, temporary ramp of earth and stone, sloping from the ground, right up to the 15-foot-high top of the Ahu. This ramp might be 5,100 feet long, a huge public works project in itself. And then they'd get the statue onto its back, maybe on a couple of smaller hau-hau logs if they had them, or just on a bed of smooth stones, and they would pull. They'd pull that 80-ton monster inch by agonizing inch up the 15-degree slope until it was lying flat, on its back, on top of the platform. You can hear the chanting, the thud-thud-thud of the Niki-Niki walk replaced by the grind of stone on stone. Okay, that's plausible. It's a year's worth of work probably just to build the ramp and pull the statue. But you did it. The 80-ton Moai is now lying like a sunbather on top of the Ahu. Now what? It's still horizontal. The mana isn't on yet. The ancestor isn't watching. It's just a very, very heavy slab of rock. You have to stand it up, and you still don't have a crane. This is the beautiful part. This is the solution that is so simple, so patient, and so Rapa Nui. They did it by playing a game of reverse Jenga. You have your 80-ton statue lying on its back. You can't lift it, but you can lift one end of it just a little bit. You get your 10 biggest, strongest workers. You get a few long, stout wooden poles, the last precious bits of timber on the island. You shove them under the statue's head, and everyone leans. Grow on. The head of the statue lifts 1 inch, and a guy waiting just shoves a handful of small stones into that 1-inch gap. Okay, drop it. Thud. The statue is now lying at a 0.01 degree angle. Great, good work, team. See you tomorrow. This is a process of insane patience. You go to the other end, the base, you get your levers, groon, you lift it 1 inch, you shove in some rocks, you go back to the head. This time, you lift it 2 inches, you shove in bigger rocks, you go back to the base, lift, rocks, back to the head, lift, rocks, back to the base, lift, rocks. This is the lever and stone or rocking scaffold method. You are slowly, painfully, millimeter by millimeter, building a pile of rocks under the statue. You are raising it, not in one glorious lift, but in 1,000 tiny, incremental, agonizing lismal shimmies. The scholarly debate still rages over the exact configuration. Did they raise it on its back as we're picturing? Or did they flip it onto its face first, which would be more stable? It could rest on its big, jutting nose and chin. The experiments, most famously by the Czech engineer Pavel, a man so nice they named him twice, suggest the on-its-back method is the most stable. And here's the quirky, terrifying tidbit. Imagine the scene. You've been doing this for months. The statue is no longer on the ahu. It is now teetering, 30 feet in the air, on top of a 15-foot-high pile of loose stones. It is balanced at a 45-degree angle. The manna is almost here. You just need the final push, the moment of truth. The team has to tip it forward off this rickety tower of rocks and into its final permanent vertical slot on the platform. You have one shot. You miscalculate the angle, it tips too far, and your 80-ton, 500-year-old ancestor topples off the platform and shatters into a million pieces on the plaza below. The chief's reaction would be unrecordable, but you don't. You are Rapa Nui. You are masters of this. With a final coordinated shove, a screech of stone, the statue slides off its rubble pile, slams into its socket on the ahu, and stands. And for the first time, it watches. The 80-ton giant slams into its socket. It is standing. The crowd of your clansmen who have been working on this for, let's say, 2 years between carving, moving, and raising, they just let out a sound, a cheer, a wail, a collective gasp. The foreman faints. The chief just nods, slowly. The mana is here. The ancestor is watching. The job is done. You wipe the sweat and dust from your eyes. You can finally rest. But you look over at the ahu next door, your rival's ahu, and you see something that makes your heart sink. Their Moai is standing, yes, but it's fancier. It's got an accessory. Your chief sees it too. He points. He is not happy. The job is not done. Because the chief, in his infinite competitive wisdom, didn't just order the 80-ton god. He ordered the deluxe package. He ordered it with the hat. You are looking at a pukao, a massive, cylindrical, deep red stone hat that is sitting perfectly, almost jauntily on top of the Moai's 30-foot-high head. It's a 12-ton bright red cherry on top of an 80-ton sundae of ancestral one-upmanship. And now, you have to go get one. This is the next layer of this beautiful, insane, logistical onion. This is the mainstream fact. The pukao are not made of the same gray-brown tuff as the statues, that's obvious. This is red scoria. It's a different, much lighter, more porous volcanic rock, almost like a solidified froth. It's beautiful, and it's symbolic. Red was a sacred, chiefly color all across Polynesia, and it doesn't come from Rano Raraku. You can't just place another order at the main factory. You have to go to a different volcano. You have to travel to Punapau. It's a small, beautiful, reddish-hued crater, inland from the main village of Hangaroa. And just like Ranararaku, it's a factory, a specialty boutique. You walk inside, and the ground is littered with these things. Dozens of them. Some are still being carved out of the crater walls. Others are finished, perfectly round. 12-ton stone cylinders, just sitting there, abandoned. It's the same whistle blue feeling you got at the Moai quarry. It's a hat shop where all the customers vanished. So, you've got your order. You carve your 12-ton pukao, you detach it, and now you have to move it. How? Well, for once, the Rapa Nui got a gift. The pukao are round. So you don't need to walk them. You just roll them. You can practically see the teams, 20 or 30 strong, bowling this 12-ton car-sized cylinder across the island over the hills, a terrifying, unstoppable, bright red stone wheel, all the way to your ahu. And you're there. You're at the coast. You're 30-foot tall. 80-ton Moai is standing there watching you with its empty eyes, and you are on the ground with a 12-ton, bright red, unstable cylinder, and the chief is tapping his foot. Well, put it on. This is the final, baffling mystery, and it's one of the most intense, open scholarly debates in Rapa Nui engineering. How did they crown the giants? Theory 1. The second ramp method. This is the safe but brutal theory. The Moai is standing. It's secure. You're not going to mess with it. So, you just build another ramp. A new, massive, temporary ramp of earth and stone 30 feet high against the back of the already standing statue. It's like building a pyramid just to put on a hat. Then you get your 12-ton pukao and you just roll it up the 30-foot high ramp onto the statue's back and then nudge it onto its head. It seems plausible. It's just so much work. Theory 2. The while you raise method. This theory is terrifying and therefore I kind of love it. This one says, no, that's stupid. Why build 2 ramps? Remember the reverse Jenga? Remember that 15-foot high pile of rocks you built to get the Moai to a 45-degree angle? This theory says that before the final tip, while the 80-ton statue is still teetering on its rubble pile, that's when you put the hat on. You'd roll the pukao up the same ramp, and with the statue lying at an angle, you'd fit the hat to its head. And then, you'd tip the entire 92-ton fully assembled ancestor into its socket as one single terrifying unit. It's an all-or-nothing bet. A single catastrophic Ihopethus works moment. And here's the quirky tidbit, the final piece that makes it all click. It's not a hat. We call it a hat. It looks like a hat. It is almost certainly not a hat. The Rapa Nui, especially the high-status, high-mana chiefs and warriors, wore their hair very long. They would tie it up in a proud high bun on top of their heads, a pupuni, or a topknot. And to make it look extra special, they would dye it red, using the red scoria dust from Punapau. That's not a hat. It's hair. It's a 12-ton bright red stone man bun. This changes everything. It's not just a decoration. It's the ultimate sign of mana and status. It's the chief's way of saying, my ancestor is so powerful he gets his pupuni in stone. It's the most fabulously, wonderfully, competitively human gesture imaginable. You stand there. The Moai is standing. The 12-ton hair bun is on. The work is finally, almost, done. The 80-ton giant slams into its socket. It is standing. The crowd of your clansmen who have been working on this for, let's say, 2 years between carving, moving, and raising, they just let out a sound. A cheer. A wail. A collective gasp. The foreman faints. The chief just nods. Slowly. The mana is here. The ancestor is watching. The job is done. The 12-ton pukao, that magnificent red top knot of hair, is on. It's perfect. It's a masterpiece of competitive engineering. And yet, it's just a rock. You're standing on the village plaza, the Moai, in front of this 92-ton, fully assembled and crowned with a menbun behemoth. You've done it. And the chief is still not happy. Because the statue is staring, but it is not seeing. You look up at the 30-foot-high face and you see the eye sockets. They are deep, shadowed, empty holes. They are blind. The work is not done until the ancestor wakes up. This is the final and most electrifying act of the entire process. For decades, archaeologists and the general public just assumed the statues were as you see them now, blind, stylized with those deep, brooding, empty sockets. It fit the aesthetic. It was mysterious. It was primitive art, but it was wrong. This is the crucial mainstream fact. In 1978, at a beautifully preserved platform called Ahu Nau Nau on the gorgeous white sand Anakina Beach, where the first king supposedly landed, archaeologists were excavating, and they found an eye, a single, perfect, complete Moai eye, buried in the sand, right where it would have fallen, and it changed everything. It was not a metaphorical eye. It was a literal, manufactured, prosthetic eye, and it was beautiful. The white of the eye, the sclera, was not stone. It was carved from gleaming, stark white coral. And the pupil, or iris, it was a disc of dark, polished red scoria, the same stuff as the pukao, or in some cases, black obsidian. It was a multi-part, inlaid, terrifyingly vivid piece of work. You have to reimagine the scene. You've been staring at these gray, blind, brooding giants. Now picture them as they were meant to be seen. You have a 30-foot-tall, 80-ton ancestor, crowned with a 12-ton red hair bun, and staring down at you with two huge, gleaming white eyes, each with a bright red, penetrating pupil. It's not mysterious anymore. It's not brooding. It is terrifying. It is alive. It is watching you. It is the difference between an off-animatronic at a theme park and the one that suddenly turns its head and looks at you. This was the Alamua, the path of the front, the final ceremonial act. The Moai is standing. The pukao is on. The entire clan is gathered. The chief and the priests are chanting, and two designated eye-openers climb the statue, or a ceremonial ladder. They are holding these two precious coralline scoria objects, and at the climax of the chant, they slam them into the sockets, and the statue wakes up. The mana, the spiritual power of the ancestor, which had been guided from the quarry, walked down the road and raised into the sky. It now has a channel. It can see. It can see the village, and it can see the descendants it is protecting. And, more importantly, it can see you, and it can judge. This is the scholarly debate. Were these eyes permanent? The fact that we only found one, and some fragments, suggests probably not. The leading theory is that the eyes were ceremonial. They were tapu. They were kept in a special, sacred house, and they were only brought out and inserted into the Moai's sockets during specific ceremonies, during a harvest festival, or the birth of a new chief, or perhaps in a time of war. The rest of the year, the Moai were asleep. They were offline. But on festival day, the priest would boot them up. They'd put the eyes in, and the mana would flow. And here's the quirky and slightly creepy tidbit. This also explains the violence of the toppling we'll talk about later. When the civil wars broke out, when the clans turned on each other, they didn't just push the statues over. That wasn't the point. The point was to kill the ancestor, to depower the rival clan's mana. So, what was the first thing you did before you tied the ropes to topple the 80-ton giant? You'd send your best, bravest, or craziest warrior up a ladder, and he would smash the eyes. He would pry them out, break the coral, scatter the scoria. You blind the ancestor, you turn him off. Then, and only then, do you topple the dead stone. This is why we don't find any eyes in their sockets. They were the primary target. The act of toppling wasn't just vandalism. It was a ritual deactivation. It was a murder. You stand there at Ahu Tongariki, looking at the 15 beautifully restored but blind giants. It's majestic, but now you know the truth. You're looking at a row of deactivated spiritual weapons, and it's probably a good thing, because you're not sure you'd want to be here, at night, if all 15 of them suddenly woke up. You're standing there in the shadow of this activated giant. The 12-ton red hair bun is on. The gleaming white android coral eyes are staring. The ancestor is awake, and you finally understand. This isn't art. This isn't just a statue. This is a piece of high-stakes spiritual technology. And the power source, the invisible electricity it's plugged into, is a concept called mana. You've heard this word. You associate it with video games, probably. I'm out of mana, I need a mana potion. But this is where that concept comes from. Mana is perhaps the single most important idea in all of Polynesian culture, from Hawaii to New Zealand to here. And it is the why. It is the engine of the entire Rapa Nui obsession. This is the mainstream fact. Mana is not a god. It's not magic in the way you think of it. It's a life force. It's an invisible, quantifiable, in a way, essence of power, authority, prestige, and efficacy. It's the stuff that makes a chief, and not just a guy with a big hat. It's the stuff that makes a warrior brave and successful. It's the stuff that makes a harvest good. It's an active, spiritual energy that can be gained or, more terrifyingly, lost. A chief was born with a certain amount of mana, inherited from his ancestors. A great warrior could gain mana through his victories. A farmer could cultivate it in his fields. But a chief who made bad decisions, who lost a battle, or whose village suffered a famine, his mana was leaking. He was failing. So what is the Moai? It's a mana battery. It's a spiritual conduit. It's a lightning rod. When a clan chief, a living, breathing man worried about his mana levels, commissioned a Moai, he wasn't just honoring his great-great-grandfather. He was tapping into his great-great-grandfather's mana. The Moai was a physical 80-ton stone and coral telephone line to the spirit world. By quarrying it, by walking it, which infused it with mana, by raising it, and by activating its eyes, the chief was plugging his entire clan into the ancestral power grid. The Moai, with its back to the sea, would project its mana over the village. It was a spiritual area of effect buff. It would make the sweet potatoes grow. It would make the chickens lay more eggs. It would make the fishermen successful. It would protect the village from tupuna, evil spirits, and perhaps from the mana of a rival clan. It was a spiritual shield and a prosperity engine all in one. This is the core scholarly debate. What was the exact nature of this relationship? When the eyes were put in, was the Moai just a symbol of the ancestor's power? Or was the ancestor literally in there? Historians and anthropologists still argue whether the Moai was a representation of the ancestor or a vessel for the ancestor's spirit to inhabit. Was it a picture of your grandfather? Or was your grandfather actually looking at you through those coral eyes? Given the sheer terror and power these things projected, you have to imagine the Rapa Nui felt. It was the latter. And here's the quirky tidbit, the one that explains everything. Mana is competitive. It's not just I have mana, so I'm good. It's I have more mana than you, and I can prove it. Your mana was public. It was on display. Your village thriving was proof. And what's the most visible, public, and ridiculously non-subtle way to prove your mana is stronger than the mana of the chief in the next valley? You build a bigger. Damn, Moai. This is it. This is the engine. It's not artistic expression, it's a spiritual arms race. The Mana Wars. Chief Hunga sees that Chief Koa, his rival, just put up a 25-foot ancestor. That is a public declaration. That is Chief Koa saying, my ancestor is stronger. My mana is greater. My sweet potatoes will be sweeter. And Chief Hunga, he cannot let that stand. It's a spiritual, political, and personal insult. He storms off to Rano Raraku and places an order. I want a 30-footer. And give it a hat. A 12-ton red one. Let's see Chief Koa's mana top that. This is the obsession. It's the why. It's the only thing that explains the escalation. From 15-footers to 30-footers to El Gigante. That 270-ton monster in the quarry, that was a chief's Allen poker bet. That was a game-over move. That was a chief trying to build a mana bomb so big it would end the competition forever. That's the Allen poker bet. El Gigante, that 270-ton monster, is a chief trying to bankrupt the casino, a game-over move. And it shows, in a way nothing else can, just how intense this competition, these statue wars, had become. You have to remember the context. You're on a 63 square mile triangle. You are trapped. You can't just leave. If you hate your neighbors, you can't just pack up and move to the next county. There is no next county. There is only 200 miles of water to the next tiny, barely inhabited rock. So all that human energy, our natural, competitive, need to be better than that guy energy, it has nowhere to go. It just recirculates. It's a societal pressure cooker. The island was divided into territories controlled by about 10 to 12 different mata, or clans. And they were all in this game. You had the Miru clan, the Marama, the Tupahotu, and they all had their patch of coastline, their marae, village plaza, and their ahu, platform. And they were all watching each other. You can just picture it. It's the Rapa Nui equivalent of keeping up with the Joneses, but the Joneses are the Koa clan, and they just rolled a 40-ton, 12-ton red hairbun-wearing ancestor onto their ahu. And you're just furious. It's so gauche, so ostentatious. And you have to respond. This is the mainstream fact. This escalating competitive status building, all fueled by mana, became the central organizing principle of Rapa Nui society for centuries. From about 1000 AD to 1600 AD, this is what they did. It was a potlatch culture, but with stone. In a potlatch, famously from the Pacific Northwest, a chief proves his wealth and power by giving away or even destroying his possessions. He proves he's so rich, he can afford to be wasteful. The Rapa Nui did the same, but they did it by destroying their resources, their labor, their food surpluses, their forests, and concentrating them into a single, unmovable, 80-ton object. A Moai wasn't just a statue, it was a billboard. It was a 30-foot-tall stone and coral advertisement that said, "The Hanga clan is thriving. Our mana is so strong we had enough surplus food to feed 20 carvers for a year, 100 rope pullers for 6 months, and an engineering team for another year just to raise this thing. We are so successful we can just park 50,000 man-hours on our lawn. How are your sweet potatoes doing?" This is the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether this competition was a healthy, society-binding ritual, or if it was always a destabilizing, resource-draining slide into chaos. In the healthy column, you can argue it was a brilliant form of non-lethal warfare. Instead of having the young men of the clans actually, kill each other in bloody, pointless battles, which is a terrible waste of good farmers and carvers, you channel all that aggression into building. It's a stone god Olympics. It binds the clan together, gives them a common purpose, and lets you win against your rival without a single drop of blood. It's posturing as policy, but that only works as long as the resources hold out. And this is the statue wars. It's a cold war of mana-based deterrence. My ancestor is bigger than your ancestor, so don't even think about stealing our chickens. But like any cold war, it escalated. It had to. A 20-footer is met by a 25-footer. The 25-footer is met by a 30-footer with a pukau. The pukau is met by El Gigante, and the strain on the system must have been immense. You're the chief. You order the 40-footer. Your farmers are nervous. "Chief, that's a lot of sweet potatoes to feed the quarry team. That's our entire surplus for the next 2 years." And the chief says, "Do it. The mana this will bring us will double the harvest, and everyone just has to hope he's right." Here's the quirky and tragic tidbit. What happens when it fails? What happens when you do spend 2 years of your clan's food surplus on a statue, and then, on the road, one of the rope teams messes up? Thwump crack. The statue dies in a faceplant on a downhill slope. Remember that failure from section 14? That's not just an oops. That is catastrophic. That is your clan's entire 2-year mana investment. Gone. Shattered. Dead on the road. The chief's mana is now disproven. He's not just a bad leader, he's a failed leader. You can imagine that chief was retired, probably from a great height. The system was brittle. It was built on a belief that just kept escalating. And then, the potlatch became a famine. The last palm tree was cut. The soil, stripped of its forest cover, began to erode and wash into the sea. The seabirds, once a massive source of protein, stopped nesting on the main island, It was too full of people and rats. The fishing canoes couldn't be replaced, no more big trees. Suddenly the mana isn't flowing, the sweet potatoes are not growing, the chickens are not laying, and the chief is still pointing at the 40-ton statue with its blind, staring eyes and saying, "Behold, our mana." And the people are starving. And they look at the statue, and they look at their empty hands, and they look back at the statue. And for the first time in 500 years, a new blasphemous thought enters their head. He's just a rock. The system is broken. The statue wars are over, because the belief that powered them has just died of starvation. Awaiting, continue. You're standing in that starved, barren, post-forest world. The belief system has shattered. The chief's mana is dead, his 80-ton, eyeless ancestor is just a rock. The statue wars are over, and the silence that follows is terrifying. Society is in a free-for-all. The organizing principle that held the Rapa Nui together for 600 years is gone. The mana grid is offline. This is a vacuum. And human society abhors a vacuum. You can't just not believe in anything. You need a new system, a new God, a new why, and a new why emerges. It's a system born of this new, brutal, scarce reality. The old system was about stability. It was about ancestry. It was about building something permanent, something from the past. The new system, it's about chaos. It's about the present. It's about taking something immediate, fleeting, and fragile. The Moai are out. The Birdman is in. You leave the quarry of Rano Raraku and the Ahu of the coasts. You travel to the southwestern corner of the island, to the edge of the massive Rano Kau volcano. And you go to a new, terrifying ceremonial center, Orongo. This is not a factory or a showroom. This is an arena. You are standing on a cliff edge so narrow it makes your stomach clench. On one side, you have the gaping, 1.6-kilometer-wide crater of Rano Kau, its freshwater lake covered in reeds. On the other side, a 1,000-foot sheer vertical drop into the raging, shark-infested Pacific Ocean. The wind up here doesn't just blow, it tries to murder you. And it's here, in this impossible, high-stakes location, that the new Rapa Nui game was played. This is the mainstream fact of the Tangata Manu, Birdman cult. The statue wars, a cold war of building, were replaced by a hot war of athletic competition. A brutal, lethal annual race. Every spring, the leaders of the surviving clans would gather here, at Orongo. They would each sponsor a champion, a hopu. And the race was on. The hopu would have to climb down that 1,000-foot sheer cliff face. Many died, dashed on the rocks below. Swim over a mile across the treacherous, open, shark-filled water to the Motu, or small islets off the coast, chiefly Motu Nui. Wait. For days or weeks living in a small cave on this barren rock, waiting for the Manutara, the sooty tern, to arrive from its migration and lay the first sacred egg of the season. Find that egg. This was a competition in itself, with rival hopu fighting over the first find. Secure the fragile egg, often in a small reed basket tied to the forehead, and swim back. And then, climb back up the 1,000-foot cliff with the egg. Unbroken, the first hopu to climb that cliff, enter the village of Orongo, and present the unbroken egg to his chief. His chief won. That chief was now the Tangata Manu, the Birdman, for the next year. He was not just a king, he was a living god. His mana was proven, not by his ancestry but by his champion. His clan now had the divine right to control and redistribute the island's now very scarce resources. The eggs, the chickens, the sweet potatoes. It was a winner-take-all system. This is the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether this new cult was a replacement for the Moai cult, or if it coexisted with it for a time. Was it a clean break? Okay, everyone, stop carving, start swimming. Or was it a messy, chaotic transition, where the Moai believers, the old guard, were violently suppressed by the new, aggressive Birdman worshippers? Given what happened next, violent suppression seemed likely. And here's the quirky, frankly weird tidbit about the winner. The Tangata Manu, the chief who won the race, his prize was terrifying. He wasn't a king who got to party and boss people around. He was tapu. He was too sacred. He had to go into seclusion for an entire year. His head was shaved, his body painted. He was not allowed to cut his fingernails or his hair. He was not allowed to touch food with his own hands. He was fed by special attendants. He was not allowed to have contact with anyone. He was a vessel, a prisoner of the god. It was a prize that was, in reality, a one-year sentence of ritual isolation. You're standing here at Orongo, the wind trying to peel you from the rock. This is the new religion. It's fast, it's brutal, it's individualistic, and it's based on the present, the egg. The mana is no longer in the stone, it's in the sky. And this new, aggressive, winner-take-all cult, it had no use for the old, blind stone ancestors of the failed regime. It had nothing but contempt for them. You're standing on that wind-blasted cliff at Orongo, the new, brutal, winner-take-all religion of the Birdman having taken hold. It's a cult based on the present, on a fragile egg, and a desperate race. And this new cult, this new generation, has nothing but contempt for the old ways. It has contempt for the chiefs whose mana failed. It has contempt for the system that starved them. And it has a burning, violent contempt for the silent, blind stone representatives of that failed system. The statue wars are over. The toppling wars have begun. This is the Huri Moai, the grim, chaotic, and terrifyingly complete period of self-destruction. This is the part of Rapa Nui history that is not mysterious. It is just sad. It's the final, violent act of a society turning on itself. You have to picture it. The belief in the mana is broken. The statues are just rocks. But they are not just rocks. They are symbols. They are the 80-ton, 92-ton with the hair bun, embodiments of the rival clan who is still stealing your chickens. And so, you decide to kill them. This is the crucial mainstream fact. When the first European explorers arrived in the 1700s, they saw many statues standing. When Captain Cook arrived in 1774, he noted several still erect. But by the 1830s, when other ships arrived, not a single Moai was left standing on its ahu. Not one. Every single activated ancestor on the entire island had been systematically and violently pulled down. This was not an earthquake. An earthquake might knock them over, but not all of them, and not in such a specific way. This was a human act. This was civil war. This was the Huri Moai. And it wasn't just vandalism. It wasn't just a couple of angry teenagers pushing over a statue. This was a ritual deactivation, a murder. The clans, now in a full-on battle for the last scarce resources, chickens, women, sweet potato patches, would raid each other's villages. And the first thing you did? You didn't just steal their food, you killed their god. And you did it specifically. You would tie ropes around the Moai's head. You'd get 50, 100, 200 people. You'd get your levers, and you'd topple the 80-ton giant, face down. Pahoro. This was the ultimate insult. You pulled it off its sacred ahu and made it eat dirt. You forced its blind, disdainful face into the ground it was supposed to be protecting. It was an act of supreme symbolic dominance. You didn't just kill their ancestor, you humiliated it. And this is the scholarly debate. Historians still argue vehemently over the timeline of this toppling. Was it a fast collapse? A single brutal island-wide civil war that lasted 50 years, say from 1780 to 1830? Or was it a slow burn? Was it part of the original statue wars? E.g., I can't build a bigger statue, so I'll just topple yours. This is a huge point of contention. Did this ecocide and collapse happen before Europeans arrived, as the classic Jared Diamond morality tale suggests? Or did it happen after? Did the arrival of European ships, their diseases, their guns, and their slave raids, which were coming, actually shatter the Rapa Nui society, and the toppling was the final, desperate act of a people already broken by us? It's a chicken and egg, or maybe statue and toppling debate, and it's a heavy one. And here's the quirky, or rather, grim tidbit. Remember the ahu? Those beautiful, precise stone platforms? They weren't just stages. They were tombs. They were the burial vaults for the most high-status members of that clan. So, when the rival clan came, they didn't just topple the Moai, they desecrated the grave. They would break open the ahu itself, pulling out the bones of the rival ancestors, scattering them, breaking them. They were rummaging through the tomb, perhaps to steal any remaining tapu artifacts. This wasn't just war, this was apocalypse. It was the complete 100% salt the earth and burnt the bones destruction of an enemy's entire spiritual and physical world. You stand at Ahu Tongariki. The 15 giants are standing now, but that's a restoration. They were all found in the 1950s, lying face down, broken, just as their topplers had left them. You are standing in a rebuilt museum, on the site of a murder. You're standing on that desecrated Ahu. The 80-ton Moai is face down in the dirt. The tomb of the ancestors has been plundered, the bones scattered. The Huri Moai, the toppling, is complete. This is the end. This is the societal game over, and for the last 100 years the world has looked at this scene, this barren, treeless island, this self-inflicted apocalypse, this graveyard of gods, and we have asked one simple, terrified question. Why? And the answer we've been given, the one that has become a global parable, is the theory of ecocide. You know this story. It's the one you were probably told in school. This is the mainstream and terrifyingly tidy morality tale, most famously popularized by authors like Jared Diamond. It goes like this. The Rapa Nui, isolated and trapped, got locked in a competitive statue war. This obsession, this mana madness, forced them to build bigger and bigger and bigger. To move these giants, they needed wood, they needed sleds, they needed rollers, they needed rope. They cut down the giant Rapa Nui palm, then they cut down another. Then they cut down the hau-hau trees for rope. They fed their entire forest, their entire ecosystem, into the wood chipper of their religion. The last tree fell, and the collapse was instant and total. Without trees, the soil now exposed to the wind and rain just left. It eroded, washing into the sea. The harvests failed. Without trees, they couldn't build new deep-sea fishing canoes. The protein disappeared. The seabirds with no trees to nest in also left. The island, stripped bare, could no longer support its peak population of 15,000. It was a Malthusian nightmare. Society broke. Famine led to civil war. The statue wars became the toppling wars. They turned on each other and in some of the grimmest oral traditions even turned to cannibalism. It's a perfect, terrible story. It's a snow globe of Earth. It's a parable for our time, a warning about our resource depletion, our climate change. Look at the Rapa Nui, the story says. They're us, if we don't get our act together. They were the society that cut down the last tree and they did it to themselves. It is a clean, simple, devastating suicide. But what if it's wrong? What if the crime scene you're standing in isn't a suicide? What if it's a homicide? This is the greatest and most bitter scholarly debate in Rapa Nui history. The ecocide theory requires one crucial thing. It requires the collapse to have happened before Europeans arrived. It has to be a pure experiment, untouched by the outside world. But the archaeologists who are actually on the island, the ones digging in the dirt, like Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo, they have a problem with that. A big one. Their data says the ecocide timeline is all wrong. Their evidence from radiocarbon dating, from pollen analysis, from archaeology, suggests the Rapa Nui population did not collapse in 1500. It was thriving. Yes, the palm trees were gone. Thanks, rats. But the Rapa Nui were genius agriculturalists. They'd adapted. They invented rock gardens, manavai, to protect their crops from the wind and lock in moisture. They were fine. When the first European, Jacob Roggeveen, arrived in 1722, his logs don't describe a starving, cannibalistic, collapsed society. He describes thousands of healthy, robust, confident people. They were so unstarved that they paddled out in their small canoes, they still had those, and offered the Dutch food. The great toppling, the Huri Moai, It hadn't happened yet. Roggeveen and Cook saw the statues standing. So, if the collapse didn't happen before contact, and it must have happened after. And that changes the why completely. The why is no longer they did it to themselves. The why is, we did it to them. The homicide theory is this. Rapa Nui society was a stable, if treeless and very crowded Stone Age culture. And then, a ship arrived. It wasn't just a visit, it was a plague bomb. The Rapa Nui had been isolated for 1,000 years. They had zero immunity to European diseases, smallpox, tuberculosis, syphilis. A single unrecorded drive-by visit from a Spanish galleon, blown off course and just stopping for water in 1700, could have left a plague that wiped out half the island. This is the quirky, or rather tragic tidbit. The collapse may have been started by a ghost ship that no one even wrote down. And then came the recorded visits. Roggeveen, 1722. Cook, 1774. Each one a new, fresh vector of disease. The society weakened. The population crashed. And then in the 1860s came the final blow. Peruvian slave raids. In one horrific year, 1862, slave traders kidnapped 1,500 Rapa Nui, half the remaining population, and took them to work in the guano mines of Peru. The haul included the king, his heir, and every single person who could read their unique written Rongo script. The entire intellectual class gone. International outcry and the fact that the Rapa Nui all died of disease in Peru forced the slavers to return the 15 survivors. Those 15 survivors brought back smallpox. And that was the end. The 90% population crash. The Huri Moai, the Great Toppling, the Civil War. It all happened in this period. It was the final, desperate, end-off-the-world act of a society that had been murdered by the outside world. So, was it a suicide? Or a homicide? Was it a neat parable about ecocide? Or a messy, brutal, and tragically human story of genocide? The Rapa Nui didn't just cut down the last tree. They survived that. What they couldn't survive was us. You're standing at Ahu Tongariki. The 15 giants are standing. But you know now that they're restored. You know they were all found face down in the dirt, toppled by their own descendants in that final tragic Huri Moai. But that's not even the whole story of their restoration. In 1960, a massive tsunami, generated by an earthquake in Chile, 2,300 miles away, slammed into this coastline. It didn't just topple the already toppled statues, it picked up the 80-ton giants and then threw them. It washed them in some cases hundreds of yards inland like bath toys. So, how did they get back? Enter modern engineering. And its name is Tadano. In the early 1990s, the nation of Japan, and specifically the Tadano Crane Company, embarked on a massive multi-million-dollar project to restore Ahu Tongariki. It was a gift to Chile, an act of global cultural preservation. And they brought the big guns. You have to picture the scene, it's 1993. A cargo ship arrives, and off that ship rolls a massive, state-of-the-art 250-ton, bright blue mobile crane. It's a high-tech monster, the absolute pinnacle of 20th century hydraulic and diesel lifting technology. It's the opposite of a toki. This is the mainstream fact. The Japanese team, led by archaeologist and fittingly crane operator Shinji Yoshikawa, got to work, and they did. In 5 years, what the Rapa Nui had done over 500. They lifted. With steel cables, with a roaring diesel engine, with complex physics calculations and a lot of safety harnesses, the Tadano crane picked up the 80-ton Moai. It lifted the 12-ton Pukao, and it placed them one by one back on the newly restored Ahu. It is the reason you are able to see this magnificent sight today. It was a triumph of modern engineering. But, and this is the most delicious but in the whole story, the crane struggled. This 250-ton, high-tech, diesel-guzzling monster, it was at the absolute limit of its capacity. The 86-ton giant, the biggest one in the lineup, the crane's computer probably flashed a lot of warning lights. The operators were sweating. The crane groaned under the strain. It did it. But it was hard. It was a brute force. I hope this doesn't brake lift. It required millions of dollars, an international shipping operation, thousands of gallons of diesel fuel, and a computer. And this is the scholarly debate. Does this high-tech solution prove how hard it was? Or does it prove how dumb we are? Historians and engineers still argue about what this experiment means. The brute force camp says, "See, it took an $800,000 crane to lift it. This proves the Rapa Nui must have had a massive lost technology." But the elegant solution camp, Team Niki Niki, says, You morons, you just proved our point. The Rapa Nui never would have done this. They never would have lifted 80 tons. That's a stupid way to do it. That's a brute force problem. The Rapa Nui didn't solve the lift 80 tons problem. They solved the how do you get an 80-ton object 30 feet in the air problem. And their solution was not a lift. It was a lever. It was a shimmy. It was the reverse Jenga, pile-of-rocks method. It was patient. It was low-tech. It was green. It probably cost one pile of rocks and a lot of sweet potatoes. And here's the quirky, beautiful tidbit. The Tadano Crane Company, as a gift, donated the crane to the island. And it's still here. It's parked in a big shed, a sleeping blue giant, a monument to our way of thinking. And the Moai are standing right next to it, a monument to their way of thinking. This is the ultimate contrast. The Japanese crane is our modern know-how. It's high energy, high resource, high speed, and based on lifting. The Rapa Nui know-how was high patience, high coordination, low resource, and based on leverage. They didn't have less knowledge than us. They had a different knowledge. We know hydraulics, they knew physics, we know internal combustion, they knew social cohesion. They knew how to get 100 people to pull a rope, or 20 people to shimmy a rock in perfect sacred unison. And maybe, just maybe, that's the more advanced technology. You're standing there, in the quiet, grassy field between the sleeping blue Tadano crane and the silent, watching Moai. One is a monument to our way of thinking, brute force, high energy, fast. The other is a monument to their way, patience, leverage, and a social cohesion so strong it's almost alien to us. The sun is finally touching the horizon. A spectacular 2,000-mile-wide smear of orange and violet that only happens in a place this far from any continental smog. The lights of the only town, Hangaroa, are twinkling a few miles away. A tiny cluster of 21st century life where you can get a surprisingly good empanada and an equally surprising, very bad, shirt-sized Moai. But you're not there. You're out here. And as the last sliver of sun vanishes, the temperature drops. The wind, your constant companion, feels colder. And the silence, it just triples. The tourist buses are gone. The park rangers have locked the gates. You are, for the purpose of this journey, alone on the coast with the 15 restored giants of Ahu Tongariki, and they are massive shadows against the deepening twilight. The only sound is the wind and the fare-off, rhythmic shush of the Pacific breaking on the black volcanic rock. It's so quiet you could almost swear you can hear your own hair growing. Or maybe, just maybe, that's the last fading echo of the mana. You've spent this entire journey trying to unravel the how, the toki on the tuff, the neki neki walk, the V-shaped roads, the reverse Jenga rock pile, the coral eyes, the pukao man buns. You've unmystified it. You've turned the mystery into a set of brilliant, low-tech, solvable physics problems. But now, in the dark, the how doesn't matter. The why is all that's left hanging in the salt spray. And this is the mainstream historical fact that hits you the hardest. The Moai are not just art. They are a physical 80-ton data log of a society. You are standing in the middle of a 600-year-long spreadsheet, carved in stone. Every statue represents a transaction of belief, a debit of resources, an investment in mana. There is no other place on Earth where a society's central guiding obsession, its rise to a peak and its catastrophic competitive escalation, is so legible. El Gigante isn't a mystery, it's a memo. It's a note from the CEO that says, "We are over-leveraged and the market is about to crash." And then, just to make it harder, there's the other silence. The Moai are a physical puzzle, But the Rapa Nui left behind a mental one. This is the quirky and utterly heartbreaking tidbit. They had writing. A real, complex, beautiful, and completely unique written language called Rongorongo. It's not carved on the Moai. It's carved on small wooden tablets. It's a series of tiny glyphic figures, birds, fish, men, geometric shapes, in a baustrophodon pattern, where you read a line, then turn the tablet 180 degrees to read the next. It's one of the few precious independent inventions of writing in human history, and we can't read it. We can't read it because those Peruvian slave raids in 1862, they didn't just take the king. They took every single person who knew the system, the Tangata Rongorongo, the scribe class. They were all kidnapped and they all died in the guano mines. They took the password with them. We have 26 tablets, the entire hard drive of the Rapa Nui culture, and it's encrypted forever. It's the most tragic elostophile error in human history. Historians still argue whether the Rongorongo script was a pre-contact invention, a true isolated genesis of writing, or if it was an imitation, a reactive script, invented after they saw the first Europeans signing their names in their ship's logs. And frankly, who cares? If it's the former, they are in a club of 4 or 5 human societies ever. If it's the latter, how brilliant is that? To see the concept of writing one time, and then go, oh, I get it. We can do that. And then invent your own, unique 180-degree flipping system. It's genius either way. And it's silent. The stars are out. No, the stars are on. The Milky Way is a smear of light, a thick, creamy celestial spill from one horizon to the other. There is no light pollution. This is the sky the walkers saw. This is the sky the Hopu swam under. You look at the giants. Their backs are to the sea. They were never watching for us. They were not welcoming aliens or warning ships. They were inward-facing. They were the private spiritual technology of a people, for that people. And the great lesson of Rapa Nui, the ecocide parable, it just feels so simple, so arrogant in the face of this. That homicide theory, the one where our diseases and our slave ships were the real whistle, it feels much heavier, much more true. The Rapa Nui didn't fail because they were primitive or short-sighted. They didn't cut down the last tree and die. They survived that. They adapted. They were resilient. They were brilliant. They were fine. What they couldn't survive was us. The wind whispers through the grass, and it sounds like the island is breathing. The Moai, they're not a warning, they're not a mystery, they're just a witness. They are the silent stone observers of a story so human. A story of belief, of obsession, of genius, of resilience, and of a final, tragic, brutal external ending. The silence isn't an absence. It's just a presence, a waiting. And now, the air is very cold, and the sky is very, very large. You can feel the weight of the Pacific, that dark 2,000-mile void, just behind you. But the 15 giants are there. They are still watching, they are still protecting the long-owned marae, the long-owned village, the long-owned people who dreamed them into being. You've been walking in their shadows for an hour. You've heard their story. You've seen the how and you've felt the why. And now all that energy, all that mana, all that conflict, and all that silence, it's just fading. It's becoming part of the night. The sound of the wind is just wind. The sound of the surf is just the ocean. You can let go of the mystery now. You've unraveled the engineering and you've touched the tragedy. The Rapa Nui have given you their story. And the story is, in the end, that they were just people. Brilliant, flawed, obsessed, and resilient, right up until the end. The stars are bright. The air is still. The stone is silent. And it's time to rest. You can dim the lights now. The journey is over. The silence of the Moai is just the sound of the world, breathing as you too, finally, drift away.